The world of monsters is full of fear, mystery, and violence. Cryptids and other myths tell us of the perils of dark forests, deep waters, and doors that must stay locked. But in the modern age, we don't really need to have these dangers personified. If you're in the mood to lurk into a murky lake or a misty forest unsupervised and without any means of rescue or communication, then, you know, that's kind of on you. Me telling you that there's a, amphibious rat man called the Claw Whisperer is not going to stop you. So a lot of the creatures once feared by entire societies as a possible reality are now known to be fabrications, and simply exist as fodder for entertainment and food for the gullible. That being said, I can confirm that the Loch Ness Monster does actually exist, and he hates you. There is one creature, however, that in most of its media is shown to be just another one of these outdated horrors whose purpose is long since dead, but in reality, whose message is more prominent now than ever. The Wendigo. In Algonquin folklore, it's a creature that represents something far more frightening than a flurry of teeth or claws, and something far more real than any supernatural threat. But before I talk about the Wendigo itself, let's take a look at some indie games and how they represent it.
Wait, Paint, do you not know what a month is?
Well, I mean... no. You know what games need more of? This noise that they have in the intro. This gravelly throat singing is just perfect. I'm surprised more games don't go with this kind of thing. Jedi Fallen Order had a good step forward in its soundtrack, but we do need more. Anyway, this game can induce psychosis. What the fuck? That is quite a bold claim. Granted, it only says a sense of psychosis, but that's still pretty major. I've seen other games be like, this might make you paranoid, or watch out, spooky alert. But saying that your game may emulate a detachment from reality is some SCP level shit. Anyway, upon launching the game, you're given two options. Wendigo game or Strigoi game. For today, we'll be sticking to the Wendigo game, but maybe the other one will pop up in the future. We're given some story about how people have gone missing and the people that went looking for them went missing, and next on this domino line of tragedy is us. But don't worry, through all the danger and fear we will be exposed to, we will have a faithful and comforting companion. A decorative crosshair. More games need these. It's such a simple way to give a unique feel to your game. Nosferatu, The Wrath of Malachi is another game which has them, and that image will stay with me for a long time. Now, they don't have to be super intricate or anything like that, but if I can turn wanton massacres into a visual tool for atmospheric strengthening, then that's just dandy. As for the other visuals of the game, it's got everything you would expect from a spooky woods adventure. Trees, deer, Oblivion-style ancient holy grounds, a theme park, a cave, another cave, all the hits, all the big ones, and the gameplay is pretty much what you would expect as well. If you've seen my looks at games like Bigfoot and The Rake, then you already get the gist. Cameras, bear traps, gun, big man, kill him until he is no longer not killed. Well, I suppose that's a bit of a generalization. There's a lot of supplementary mechanics at play here too. In fact, I would say there are entirely too many supplementary mechanics at play. There's a Slender-style collect X of Y mechanic where you have to find these bodies, which, to be fair, was also in Bigfoot. There are these stones and engravings that you have to find across a few different locations, a ritual that you have to enact, and these little spinny effigies. That may not sound like a lot to keep up with, but you're not given any indication as to what these do in the game's intro. If you're going into this game, like all of the other cryptid hunting games, expecting to be able to shoot the Wendigo to death, you're gonna have a bad time. The only way to kill him is to collect all of the little stones and engravings, set up the ritual, ignite a big thing using a lighter that spawns on one of the many bodies that are scattered around, and then lure the creature into a big circle. And here I was using bear traps. Oh, and those little spinny effigies I saw? I started spinning them around, thinking that maybe, they had to be aligned or in a particular pattern or whatever, but upon doing some research very late into my gameplay, I found out something a little worrisome. They are not puzzle pieces. They are, in fact, cameras. For the Wendigo. While I was trying to outsmart this mythological terror, he was getting a point-blank view of me twirling his cameras like a little madman. Again, you're not explicitly told this. I think keeping some information from the player is good. In fact, I would enjoy the revelation that these are in fact cameras if it wasn't for the main objective of the game itself being a puzzle to figure out. That's simply too much responsibility for a simple creature like me. I legitimately spent 80% of my time playing just trying to shoot the bastard before I incidentally stumbled across these extremely inconspicuous but vitally important little rocks. As per usual with these kinds of games, I ended up sitting in the safe base and luring this funny little man into a series of bear traps in a hilarious yet tragic Tom and Jerry style scenario. However, unlike the other games, this plan was not exactly foolproof, because on one solemn night when I ventured away from my home, I discovered something quite inconvenient. The fucker stole it! He stole my house! He comes onto my property, destroys it, and then puts his own shit down.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
This completely uproots the whole formula, as there is now no safe spot to return to for little baby men like myself, unless you're counting this funky little stick that he can't get to, or the Ferris wheel in the theme park. Wait, where's the Ferris wheel? Where's the theme park? I was not joking earlier when I mentioned a theme park in the forest. It's a real thing, I swear. But it's not here anymore, and I can't prove that it exists. Is this what Bigfoot enjoyers feel? Honestly, it was right here before. Please believe me. Anyway, in searching for this mythical theme park, I found the lair of the mythical beast instead, which I guess is a pretty cool compromise. Turns out that the cave system that the Wendigo sleeps in spans the entire map and looks pretty much identical wherever you go, sans the room with the happy bodies and the presence. So I can honestly see why this guy is so irate all the time. I recently moved house, and honestly, I was also hunting people and destroying their buildings before I decorated, using some cool new things from your sponsorship here. Overall, I would say that the Wendigo, while competent in its design and behavior and so on, is kind of inconsequential to the game as a whole. You could put any cryptid here: Bigfoot, Goatman, Chupacabra, Dogman, all of these would fit pretty easily. There is some tribal visual aid in there, but it feels like it's doing little more than adding flavor rather than any real substance. But I will say, while the game did not deliver in its promise/threat of psychosis, it did succeed in making me very paranoid. It stole my house from me. What? And don't even get me started on that... Holy shit. Oh good lord. I knew there was a theme park! Telling Steam that I own a VR headset is one of the biggest mistakes I have ever made, as, unexpectedly, this led to one of the biggest jump scares I've ever had. Whenever I start a game with any kind of VR support now, which appears to be every single Unreal Engine game from the last 4 or 5 years, it opens on a black screen while trying to find the headset that isn't even plugged in. And this one waited until I legitimately thought there was something wrong with it before screeching into life. Unorthodox, 10 out of 10. It scared me. Seconds later, the game revealed that it's a Slender clone, and that scared the shit out of me. And to think I was having so much fun whipping this door around. The basic gist of this is your classic Slender style game. Find things, spooky man wants you to fall over forever. But there are some nifty mechanics here that make it a bit less of a slog than most other Slender clones. For example, an EMF detector that doesn't work. You're telling me this doll isn't haunted? You can actually use it to track the Wendigo while he hunts you, which makes it a bit more interesting gameplay-wise. You're not going to be jump scared by him unless you're not paying attention. As for the Wendigo himself, he's an interesting one. He's not your standard deer-headed Wendigo that we've come to expect from other games and stories, yet this is actually more accurate to the original folklore. The Wendigo did not start out as a beast, so to speak. Instead, it was a corrupted human. This is something I'll go into later, but for now, just know that this is a pretty accurate representation of him. He's got the decaying skin, unnatural claws, chunks of missing flesh. All of this is Gucci. The scales and the enormous arm are a little unorthodox though. The thing this game makes me think the most about though is not Wendigos. It's mansions. This may be controversial, but honestly, mansions fucking suck. They're awful things. They're so space inefficient. I'm not saying we all need to live in the beautifully packed tenements of my homeland, but holy shit, look at how everything is placed here. It's horrible. The old woody library feel is sweet, but good lord, living here seems like a nightmare. The shambling terror of myth doesn't help much either. In terms of gameplay, the map actually works pretty well. I found there are parts of the map that favor the player and parts that favor the Wendigo, which I think's pretty neat. Initially, I was a little bit annoyed that only one of the items you're hunting for spawns at a time, but once I realized how compact the map is, that made much more sense. There's also a cool little camera setup that shows you where the next thing is, but again, it's still a Slender clone. There are only so many positives I can bring up before reminding you of this. It's just not a good subgenre. Granted, this one is pretty cool, but good lord, this entire sect of horror games is an exercise in monotony and self-loathing. It's good practice for the game developer though. I hope they go on to use their cooler ideas and innovations from this and apply it to further work. But for now, I'm done with Slender clones. Spoilers! It's another Slender clone. A Steam community post called this game the closest we'll get to Bloodborne on PC. Yeah, okay. Never before have I had a game open up in an extremely low 4:3 resolution with no visible way to change it. Or, rather, never before have I had a game do this after the year 2003. So this was a nice little blast from the past. I actually had to hunt down instructions on how to make it widescreen and 1080p, which was a much longer process than it should have been. And at the end of that search was a treasure that told me the way to change the video settings was to hold down left shift while the game launched. In my initial notes, I was outraged by this, but what followed knocked my will to express this down a few notches. I hope that long-term viewers of the channel have noticed that I do not like being excessively negative towards games, particularly ones with seemingly small development teams. But I'm not gonna go easy on this one for a few reasons you'll see shortly. Upon opening the game, properly with the correct settings, I was greeted with some exquisite news. I, despite never playing the game before, and due to what I can only imagine is raw skill, was ranked 20 globally on the game's leaderboards, with a score of secret. You may say that I'm number 20 because I'm the 20th player to ever play the game and I shouldn't mock it for having a low player base, but it nearly has 50 Steam reviews, so I don't think this is the case. Much like the last game, this one is also available in VR, yet, unlike the last game, this one has no shame. In the non-VR version of the game, you are a floating tool belt of items that is extremely clunky to interact with. In order to use items, you must angle the camera so that the thing you're holding makes physical contact with whatever you're trying to use, as you can't rely on the VR controller to do it for you. There are also these screen effects, which I'm sure would have looked cool in VR, but now instead look like this. As for other gameplay quirks, if you end up dying, which you likely will, the player character keeps talking through the death screen.
Must be careful.
You can't say he's not determined. There's also a sprinting mechanic that, straight up doesn't work. As in, the buttons it tells you to press simply don't do anything. The map is horrifically disorienting, and that's outside of VR. I got lost several times and ended up walking in circles when I thought I was going straight. The Wendigo himself is pretty easy to avoid. The game gives you a whole spiel about sprinting away when he sees you, but, you know, the sprinting doesn't work. And the best way to avoid him is actually to stand behind a tree when he's looking for you, because naturally, this mythical beast of the woods would be tricked through hiding in the woods. And once you've found out how to do this consistently, the game turns into a monotonous scavenger hunt where you're going from place to place trying to burn these totems, and every so often having to stand in place for like 30 seconds. Now, as I was saying earlier, I would not usually go as hard as I have into this game, but now we need to look at how the game handles the Wendigo itself. Incorrectly. Incorrectly is the kindest way to say it. So let's talk about the cultures on display in this game. In order to locate the Native American totems to destroy the Native American creature, we must use an Egyptian Ankh, which the game spells wrong in a hint, head to a Central American temple, and while we are traveling to that temple, we may run into these stick effigies, which are, from what I can tell, ripped straight from the fucking Blair Witch Project. Oh, and the game's trailer has a quote from the Bible. Now, there is absolutely a setting, story, or world where you could mix the narrative strengths of each of these mythologies, cultures, and religions. In the Blair Witch Project. But this game is not that setting, story, or world. Now on to the actual Wendigo creature. They get it all wrong. The Wendigo is meant to be a personification of gluttony and greed, devouring everything it can catch, including parts of itself if it gets desperate enough. But look at how many deer and human carcasses there are all over the place. This is so much wasted meat. But of course, I don't think they were going for an accurate use of a Wendigo. They were going for a spooky monster, scary, ooh. But this is not a problem unique to Seeking Evil. This is a problem in the cryptozoological world at large. The Wendigo is considered in many of the places Bigfoot or the Rake would be. Just a spooky being. But that's not what it is. The Wendigo is a much more complex being than many of the horrors of the West. If you were to go into the woods today, you would probably not run into a werewolf. But you may run into a wolf. Or a man. We knock out 2 birds with 1 stone and tell kids that there is a wolf man out to get them if they stray too far. That's the kind of formula most of the stories I grew up with had. The Wendigo is not like that. It's not just a warning of immediate danger or a tool to keep the reckless in check. It's a warning of corruption. In its physical descriptions, it's evocative of gluttony, being a human possessed by a spirit that causes cannibalistic tendencies to the point of chewing off its own lips if desperate enough. Some media gets this right, or at the very least comes close. In gaming, Until Dawn is one that, while having far from perfect native representation, gets kind of close with the Wendigo, at least in literal terms. In its metaphorical meanings, it is a warning against greed. The spirit that possesses the human is a manifestation of selfishness and moral decay. The Algonquin people said that anyone that acted against their fellow man would be at risk of being consumed by it. In effect, the Wendigo is much closer to biblical representations of Satan or a demon rather than a feral animal. And much like the demons of the Bible, it was sometimes used to explain mental illness and other misunderstood circumstances in times where people simply didn't know better. It's not a threat of physical danger, it's a warning about the fragility of peace and harmony in society. And in a horribly ironic way, the Wendigo has been cannibalized alongside the rest of Native American culture by Western media to become another spooky icon in an already oversaturated field. When we colonized the American continent, we destroyed massive quantities of culture and life which people still suffer for today. And we did it because we wanted land, and resources, and our way of life over anyone else's. So in effect, the threat of the Wendigo was and is real, and every time you see it misrepresented in media, well, that's just another symptom of the Wendigo's victory. So to finish, I would like to say that the Wendigo is not a cryptid, because cryptids aren't real. Thanks for watching.